Vincent Torres sat in his study reviewing blueprints for his latest construction project when his phone rang. 23 years of marriage had taught him to recognize the sound of trouble, but nothing could have prepared him for the voice on the other end. Vincent Torres. The voice was smooth and confident, with an edge of smugness that immediately set Vincent's teeth on edge. "Speaking," Vincent replied. "This is Connor Fitzgerald. I think we need to talk about Amanda." Vincent's pen stopped moving across the blueprint. Amanda was his wife, had been for over 2 decades. They'd built a life together, raised 2 children, and weathered storms that would have broken weaker couples. Or so he'd thought. "Who is this?" Vincent's voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone that had once made enemy combatants think twice during his years as a Marine Corps interrogator. "Amanda's with me now," Connor continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "She's been with me for months. She wanted me to call you because she doesn't have the courage to do it herself." Vincent's grip tightened on the phone. Through the window of his home office, he could see Amanda's Mercedes in the driveway. She'd claimed to be at book club tonight, the same lie she'd been using for weeks. "She's filing for divorce," Connor pressed on. "Half of everything you've built, half your construction company, half your assets. But here's the thing, Vincent. If you want to discuss terms, you'll have to go through my lawyer. I'm not interested in dealing with you directly." The line went quiet except for Vincent's controlled breathing. In his Marine days, he'd learned to channel rage into cold calculation. 23 years of civilian life hadn't dulled that skill. "What's the lawyer's name?" Vincent asked calmly. "Robert Henley, downtown. You can reach him Monday morning." Connor paused, clearly expecting an outburst that never came. "Oh, and Vincent, don't try calling Amanda. Her number's changed." The line went dead. Vincent set the phone down with deliberate precision and walked to the window. Amanda's car was still there, but the woman he'd thought he knew was already gone. He pulled out his laptop and began typing. First, a search for Connor Fitzgerald, then Robert Henley. Connor's social media painted the picture of a real estate agent who drove expensive cars and wore watches worth more than most people's annual salaries. Photos showed him at charity galas and country club events, always with a different woman on his arm, until recently. Recent photos showed Amanda, Vincent's Amanda, smiling at Connor's side at restaurants Vincent couldn't afford on his construction company owner salary. But it was the lawyer that made Vincent's blood run cold. Robert Henley wasn't just any attorney. He was the same Robert Henley who'd served as legal counsel during Vincent's court-martial hearing 15 years ago. The hearing that had ended Vincent's military career in disgrace and nearly sent him to prison. Vincent leaned back in his chair, a cold smile spreading across his weathered face. Connor Fitzgerald had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd chosen the one lawyer in the city who knew exactly what Vincent Torres was capable of when pushed too far. The front door opened, and Amanda's voice drifted through the house. "Vince, I'm home." Vincent closed his laptop and checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. Book club had supposedly ended at 9. In the study, he called back, his voice betraying nothing. "In here." Amanda appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair slightly mussed, lipstick gone, clothes wrinkled in ways that told their own story. She'd always been beautiful. That's what had first caught his attention 25 years ago when they'd met at a college party. But now, seeing her after Connor's call, Vincent noticed things he'd been blind to. The guilt in her eyes, the way she avoided his gaze, the expensive jewelry that hadn't come from him. "How was book club?" he asked. "Oh, you know how it is," she replied. "We got carried away discussing the ending." She moved to the liquor cabinet and poured herself a generous glass of wine. Her hands shook slightly. "What book are you reading?" Vincent asked. Amanda froze for just a moment. "The new thriller everyone's talking about. I can't remember the exact title." Vincent nodded slowly. "Sounds interesting. Maybe I'll pick up a copy." "I don't think you'd like it," she said quickly. "It's more of a women's book." "I see." Vincent stood and walked to where Amanda stood by the cabinet. She flinched as he approached, but he simply reached around her for his own glass. "I got an interesting call tonight." Amanda's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the boards like blood. "Oh God, I'm so clumsy," she gasped, dropping to her knees to gather the pieces. Vincent knelt beside her, his large hands covering hers, stopping her frantic movements. When she looked up, he was studying her face with the same intensity he'd once reserved for enemy prisoners. "Careful," he said softly. "You don't want to cut yourself." In her eyes, he saw everything Connor had told him was true. But he also saw something Connor couldn't have known about. The fear. Amanda knew him well enough to recognize the dangerous calm in his voice. Vincent helped her to her feet, his grip gentle but firm. "Let me clean this up. You look tired. Why don't you go to bed?" Amanda backed toward the door, never taking her eyes off him. "Are you coming up in a while?" "I have some work to finish." After she left, Vincent cleaned up the broken glass and spilled wine with methodical precision. Then he returned to his computer and began making a list. Names, addresses, phone numbers, vulnerabilities. These were the skills that had made him the Marine Corps' most effective interrogator. The same skills that had gotten him court-martialed when he'd gone too far with an enemy combatant were about to be put to use again. Connor Fitzgerald had declared war. He just didn't know it yet. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Vincent's mood as he stood outside the downtown law offices of Henley and Associates. The building was older and respectable, with the kind of understated elegance that suggested serious money changed hands within its walls. Vincent had spent the weekend playing the role of oblivious husband, while Amanda nervously went through the motions of normalcy. She'd made his favorite breakfast Sunday morning, clearly expecting him to say something about Connor's call. When he didn't, her anxiety had ratcheted up to the point where she'd excused herself twice to make phone calls that left her looking more stressed each time. The receptionist directed him to the third floor, where Robert Henley's office occupied the corner suite. Vincent knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, a habit from his military days that tended to put civilians off balance. The man behind the mahogany desk looked up sharply, then froze as recognition dawned. Robert Henley had aged well for a man in his 60s. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and his navy suit looked expensive and perfectly tailored. But 15 years hadn't been long enough for him to forget the man who'd nearly ended his career. "Yes, I am the husband," Vincent said, settling into the leather chair across from Henley's desk without invitation. The lawyer's face went pale, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. "Vincent, I had no idea that you were representing the man who's sleeping with my wife." Vincent's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Funny coincidence, isn't it?" Henley's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. During Vincent's court-martial, Henley had been the prosecutor's star witness, the one who'd provided the legal justification for charging Vincent with excessive force during an interrogation. The case had been thrown out on a technicality, but not before Vincent's military career was destroyed and his reputation shattered. "I should probably recuse myself from this case," Henley said, reaching for his phone. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary." Vincent leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his posture casual, but his eyes locked on Henley's. "After all, we have history. We understand each other." Henley's hand moved away from the phone. "What do you want, Vincent?" "Just to talk, man to man, about my wife, about Connor Fitzgerald, about the future." Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You see, I've done some research since Connor's call. Interesting man, your client. Did you know he's been married twice before?" "Both marriages ended in messy divorces when the wives discovered his affairs." "I can't discuss my client's personal—" "Of course not. Attorney-client privilege and all that." Vincent waved dismissively. "But I can discuss my wife. 23 years of marriage, Robert. 23 years of building something together. Of course you'd know about building something only to have it destroyed, wouldn't you?" Henley's face flushed. "That was different. You mistreated a prisoner, Vincent. I was doing my job." "Were you?" Vincent's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because I seem to remember you had some interesting financial problems around that time. Gambling debts, wasn't it? Strange how those debts disappeared right after my case concluded. The silence in the office was deafening. Henley's breathing had become shallow and a thin sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the air conditioning. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the desk between them. Would you like to see the bank records? The payment from a certain offshore account to your personal checking account 3 days after my court-martial ended? Henley stared at the folder as if it contained a venomous snake. How did you... You'd be amazed what 15 years and the right connections can uncover. Turns out military intelligence has long memories and longer reaches. Vincent tapped the folder. This is just a copy, of course. The originals are in a safe place along with some very interesting audio recordings from that time period. What do you want? Henley's voice was barely a whisper. Vincent leaned back in his chair, apparently relaxed. Right now, nothing. I'm just here to discuss my wife's divorce. Remember? Though I have to say, I'm curious about Connor's proposal. What exactly is he offering Amanda in exchange for half my life's work? Henley fumbled through papers on his desk, his hands shaking. He's offered to support her through the divorce proceedings. Help her establish a new life. How generous. And what does he get out of it? I can't. Of course you can't. But let me guess, he gets the devoted wife of a successful businessman along with half of that businessman's assets. Not a bad deal for a real estate agent who's been struggling since the market downturn. Vincent's research had revealed Connor's financial troubles, hidden beneath the facade of expensive toys bought on credit. Henley looked up sharply. How did you know about his financial situation? Vincent smiled. The same way I know about yours. The same way I know about the 3 other women Connor's been seeing while he's been with my wife. The same way I know about his cocaine habit and his underground poker games. The lawyer's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But here's what I find most interesting, Vincent continued, standing and retrieving his folder. Connor chose you as his lawyer. Out of all the divorce attorneys in this city, he picked the one man who had the power to destroy me 15 years ago. That seems like more than a coincidence. I don't understand. Think about it, Robert. Who would know enough about my past to tell Connor exactly which buttons to push? Who would know that hiring you would be the perfect psychological warfare? Vincent headed for the door, then paused. I'll be in touch. Vincent, wait. But Vincent was already gone, leaving Robert Henley alone with his files, his secrets, and the growing realization that he'd become a pawn in a game far more dangerous than he'd understood. In the elevator, Vincent allowed himself a small smile. Connor Fitzgerald thought he was playing chess, but he had just revealed that someone else was moving the pieces. Someone who knew about Vincent's past, someone who had connected Connor with Henley deliberately. The game was more complex than it appeared, but Vincent had spent years learning to think 3 moves ahead. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, he'd already begun planning his next move. Vincent's construction office sat in an industrial district on the outskirts of town, a practical building that reflected his no-nonsense approach to business. He'd built Torres Construction from nothing after his military discharge, turning a small crew and borrowed equipment into one of the city's most respected commercial contractors. Now, as he reviewed the company files, he was looking for something specific, and he found it in a folder marked Riverside Development Project. Connor Fitzgerald's name appeared on the real estate documentation as the listing agent for the luxury condominiums Vincent's company had built 2 years ago. It was a connection so obvious he'd missed it entirely, hidden in plain sight among hundreds of business relationships. His assistant, Maria Santos, knocked on his door. In her 50s, she'd been with the company for 8 years and had an intuitive understanding of when Vincent needed space versus when he needed information. The Henderson project files you requested, she said, setting a stack of folders on his desk. And Vincent, that real estate agent called 3 times this morning. Connor Fitzgerald said it was urgent. Vincent looked up from the Riverside files. Did he say what he wanted? Something about a property inspection that needed to be expedited. He seemed agitated. Vincent checked his watch. 2:30 p.m. Get him on the line. Maria dialed from the desk phone, then handed Vincent the receiver. Connor's voice came through tense and strained, a far cry from the smug confidence of Friday night's call. Vincent, thank goodness. I need your help. The irony wasn't lost on Vincent. My help? That's interesting, considering our last conversation. Look, I know this is awkward, but I have a client who's desperate to close on a property your company built. The buyer wants an inspection done today or the deal falls through. We're talking about $1 million sale here. Which property? Vincent asked. The Riverside Development, Unit 4B. I know it's short notice, but I'll be there in an hour, Vincent said, hanging up before Connor could respond. Maria raised an eyebrow. That's the man who's sleeping with your wife, isn't it? Vincent had always appreciated Maria's directness. She'd immigrated from El Salvador with nothing, built a life through determination and hard work, and had no patience for people who destroyed what others had built. Among other things, Vincent confirmed. Want me to call the boys? Miguel and Tony would be happy to accompany you to the inspection. Vincent considered it. Miguel and Tony were his foremen, both ex-military, both men who understood loyalty and had little tolerance for betrayal. But this required finesse, not muscle. Not today, but keep them on standby. The drive to Riverside Development gave Vincent time to think. Connor's urgency suggested desperation, which meant Vincent's weekend research had already begun to bear fruit. A few carefully placed phone calls to contacts in the real estate community had started rumors about Connor's financial stability. Nothing actionable, nothing that could be traced back to Vincent, but enough to make nervous clients start asking questions. The Riverside Development was Vincent's pride. 12 luxury condominiums overlooking the river, each one a masterpiece of modern design and construction. Unit 4B was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound balcony that offered stunning views. Connor was waiting in the lobby, his usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair less perfectly styled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Vincent, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Just doing business, Vincent replied, leading the way to the elevator. Who's the buyer? A tech executive relocating from California, cash purchase, no financing contingencies. The deal has to close by Friday or he walks. They rode the elevator in silence, Connor fidgeting with his phone while Vincent studied the man who'd been with his wife. Up close, Connor was smaller than he'd appeared in photos, probably 5'10" to Vincent's 6'2", with the soft look of someone who'd never done physical labor. Unit 4B was exactly as Vincent remembered it. Pristine, elegant, a testament to his company's craftsmanship. But as they entered, Vincent noticed something that made his blood run cold. Interesting choice for a bachelor, he said, noting the feminine touches scattered throughout the unit, a woman's scarf on the dining room chair, expensive perfume on the bathroom counter, a framed photo on the nightstand that he recognized even from across the room. Connor followed his gaze to the photo. Amanda, laughing at some private joke, looked younger and happier than she had in years. Vincent, I can explain. Can you? Vincent moved closer to the photo, noting the background. A restaurant he'd never been to, one too expensive for his construction worker's budget. When was this taken? That's not. She was just helping me stage the unit. Vincent turned slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. In the corner of the living room sat a leather chair he recognized. The one Amanda had claimed was being reupholstered. Next to it was a wine cabinet stocked with vintages from their own cellar. You've been living here, Vincent said. It wasn't a question. Connor's face had gone white. The buyer isn't coming, is he? There is no buyer. Vincent smiled, but it was the predatory smile he had once worn during interrogations. Oh, there was a buyer until this morning. When certain information about the listing agent's background came to light, seems potential clients don't like working with people who have undisclosed financial problems. How did you? The same way I know about the cocaine, Connor. The same way I know about the gambling debts you've been hiding from Amanda. The same way I know about the other women. Vincent moved closer, backing Connor toward the balcony. Did you really think you could take my wife, my money, my life's work, and I'd just roll over? Connor's back hit the sliding glass door. Vincent, please, you don't understand. Amanda came to me. She said, you'd become cold, distant. She said the marriage was already over. Is that what she said? Vincent reached past Connor and opened the balcony door, cool autumn air rushing into the room. And you believed her? They were 12 stories up. The wind was stronger here, whipping Connor's hair as he gripped the doorframe. She loves me, Connor said desperately. We're going to build a life together. With my money. She deserves better than... Vincent's hand shot out, gripping Connor's throat and lifting him slightly off his feet. The movement was so fast, so precisely controlled, that Connor barely had time to register what was happening before he found himself staring into the eyes of a trained fighter. Let me explain something to you, Vincent said, his voice deadly calm despite the wind. I spent 12 years in the Marines learning very specific skills. Skills that kept me alive in places where weak men like you wouldn't last 12 minutes. He applied just enough pressure to make breathing difficult, but not impossible. Those skills didn't disappear when I became a civilian. Connor's hands clawed at Vincent's wrist, but it was like trying to move a steel cable. I know about your arrangement with Robert Henley, Vincent continued. I know someone put you up to this, someone who knew exactly how to hurt me. But here's what you didn't know. I don't break, I don't bend, and I sure as heck don't forgive. He released Connor, who collapsed against the doorframe, gasping. You have 24 hours to end this charade with my wife and disappear from this city, Vincent said, straightening his jacket. If you don't, I'll show you what happens to people who try to take what's mine. You can't threaten me, Connor wheezed. Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Connor the screen, a recording app that had been running since they'd entered the unit. And tell them what? That you lured me here under false pretenses to the apartment where you've been living with my wife? That you've been stealing from me while sleeping with her? He pocketed the phone. Go ahead and call them. I'll wait. Connor said nothing, his eyes wide with the recognition that he'd been outmaneuvered completely. Smart choice, Vincent said, heading for the door. 24 hours, Connor. Don't test me. As the elevator descended, Vincent felt the familiar calm that came after decisive action. Connor would run. Men like him always did when faced with real consequences. But running wouldn't save him because Vincent now knew there was someone else behind this. Someone who'd orchestrated the entire situation. And Vincent Torres had never left an enemy behind. Amanda was sitting at the kitchen table when Vincent arrived home, her cell phone face down beside an untouched cup of coffee. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red from crying, her usual perfect composure shattered. Connor called, she said, simply. Vincent hung his keys on the hook by the door, noting that Amanda's suitcases, the expensive set he'd bought her for their 10th anniversary, were stacked by the stairs. Did he? Vincent moved to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup with steady hands. What did he have to say? He said you threatened him. He said you know about us. Her voice was small, defeated. Vincent sat across from her at the table where they'd shared thousands of meals, discussed their children's futures, planned their retirement. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, highlighting the tears on Amanda's cheeks. I know about a lot of things, he said quietly. I know about the unit at Riverside where you've been playing house with him. I know about the money you've been taking from our joint account to fund your new relationship. I know about the lies, the book clubs that don't exist, the friends you've been using as alibis. Amanda's composure cracked completely. I never meant for it to happen this way. You have to believe me. Do I? Vincent studied his wife's face, looking for some trace of the woman he'd fallen in love with 25 years ago. How long, Amanda? How long have you been planning to leave me for him? It wasn't planned. It just happened. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Connor didn't just happen to hire the one lawyer in this city who could hurt me. You didn't just happen to fall into bed with a man who specializes in seducing married women. This was orchestrated. Amanda's eyes darted away from his, confirming what he'd suspected. I don't know what you mean. Someone told you about my past, didn't they? Someone explained exactly which buttons to push, which lawyers to hire, how to make this as painful as possible. Vincent leaned forward. Who was it, Amanda? Who's been pulling the strings? Nobody's pulling strings. I fell in love with a man who's been using you to get to me. Vincent's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Connor's broke, Amanda. His real estate business is failing. He's got gambling debts and a habit that's spiraling out of control. You're not his escape from a lonely life. You're his meal ticket. Amanda shook her head violently. That's not true. He loves me. Does he? Then why did he call me begging for help with a fake property inspection this afternoon? Why is he desperately trying to close deals that don't exist? Vincent pulled out his phone and showed her a series of photos he'd taken at the Riverside unit. Does a man in love really move his girlfriend into an apartment he's trying to sell? The photos showed the staged apartment, the personal items, the wine from their own cellar. Amanda stared at them, her face going pale. He said it was temporary until we found a place together. He lied to you just like you've been lying to me. Vincent put the phone away. But that's not what really bothers me. What bothers me is that someone set this whole thing up. Someone who knew enough about my past to weaponize it against me. Amanda was crying again, but Vincent felt nothing. The woman sitting across from him had become a stranger the moment she'd chosen to betray their marriage. The children, she whispered. What are we going to tell them? Vincent's jaw tightened. Their daughter Lisa was a senior at Stanford. Their son David, a freshman at Georgia Tech. Both had grown up believing in the strength of their parents' marriage, using it as a foundation for their own relationships. You should have thought about that before you decided to blow up their family. They'll understand. They'll see that I had to choose happiness. They'll see that their mother is someone who abandoned their father for a man she barely knows. Vincent's voice carried the finality of a judge's sentence. But that's your problem now, not mine. Amanda's head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean, you made your choice when you moved in with Connor. You chose him over your family, over 23 years of marriage, over everything we built together. Vincent stood, looking down at the woman who'd shared his bed for over 2 decades. So, go take your suitcases and go play house with your boyfriend. But understand this. When his lies catch up with him, when his debts come due, when his other women surface, don't come running back here. Vince, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. There's nothing to work out. You made your choice. Vincent's expression was carved from stone. But know this. I'm going to find out who's behind this. I'm going to find out who convinced you that destroying our marriage was a good idea. And when I do, there will be consequences. Amanda gathered her purse with shaking hands but made no move toward her suitcases. What if I don't go? What if I stay and fight for our marriage? Vincent's laugh was cold and humorless. You stopped fighting for our marriage the first time you lied to come home to Connor. You stopped being my wife the first time you chose him over me. You stopped being welcome in this house the moment you decided I was something to be discarded. I still love you. No, Vincent said quietly. You love the security I provided, the lifestyle I built, the respectability that came with being Mrs. Vincent Torres. But you don't love me. If you did, you never would have been able to betray me. Amanda finally stood, moving toward her suitcases with the defeated shuffle of someone who'd just realized the depth of her mistake. At the door, she turned back one last time. Connor said you'd never forgive me. He said you were the kind of man who holds grudges forever. Vincent met her eyes, and for a moment she saw the Marine who'd survived 2 tours in Afghanistan, who'd done things in the name of duty that still woke him up in cold sweats. He's right, Vincent said simply. I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I sure as heck don't take back what's been thrown away. After she left, Vincent sat alone in the kitchen as darkness fell outside. The house felt different now. Emptier, but also cleaner somehow, as if a poison had been drawn out. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sorry it had to be this way, but some lessons can only be learned through pain. A friend. Vincent stared at the message, his mind racing. Someone had orchestrated Amanda's betrayal as a lesson, as punishment for something from his past. But who? And why now, after 15 years? He deleted the message and began making calls. The first was to a private investigator he'd used for background checks on potential employees. The second was to an old Marine buddy who specialized in the kind of security work that didn't appear on resumes. By the time Vincent went to bed in the house that was finally his again, he'd set wheels in motion that would uncover every secret, every connection, every person who'd played a role in destroying his marriage. And then he would show them all what happened to people who declared war on Vincent Torres. The private investigator Vincent had hired was named Russell Pike, a former Army Ranger who traded combat boots for a detective's license after an IED ended his military career. Pike's office was in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax service, but his reputation was gold among people who needed things found that didn't want to be found. Vincent sat across from Pike's cluttered desk, watching the man review files that represented 3 days of intensive investigation. Pike was thorough. It was what made him expensive and effective. "Your wife's boyfriend is small-time," Pike said, setting down Connor's file. "Real estate agent with a mediocre track record, expensive tastes, and poor impulse control. But he's not the brains behind this operation." "What did you find?" Pike pulled out a series of photographs. "Connor Fitzgerald didn't randomly meet your wife at a wine bar like she claimed. He was introduced to her by someone else. Someone who made sure they'd be seated at the same table during a charity auction 6 months ago." The photos showed Amanda at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, smiling as a woman Vincent didn't recognize guided her toward Connor's table. The woman was elegant, perhaps 50, with the kind of understated wealth that suggested serious money. "Who is she?" "Catherine Morrison, widow of federal Judge Harrison Morrison, who died in a car accident 2 years ago." Pike pulled out another file. "She's been very active in local charities since her husband's death, particularly causes that attract wealthy donors." Vincent studied Catherine Morrison's photograph. She was attractive in the way that expensive maintenance could achieve. Silver hair, intelligent eyes, and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "What's her connection to me?" "That's where it gets interesting." Pike spread out a timeline on his desk. "Judge Morrison presided over your court-martial hearing 15 years ago. He was the one who threw out the case on the technicality that saved you from prison." Vincent felt the pieces clicking into place. "And his widow blames me for his death." "Not directly, but Judge Morrison received death threats for years after your case, mostly from family members of the prisoner you interrogated. The threats escalated after Morrison refused to allow a civil trial against you. He started drinking heavily, became paranoid enough to drive 90 miles an hour on a rainy night 2 years ago." The picture was becoming clearer. "She thinks his death is my fault. She thinks his death is a consequence of the decision he made to protect you. And she spent 2 years planning her revenge." Pike pulled out bank records. "She's been funding Connor's lifestyle, paying his debts, keeping him afloat financially. She's also been paying Robert Henley's gambling debts for the past year." Vincent studied the financial documents. The amounts were staggering. Over $200,000 to Connor, another $100,000 to Henley, all traced through a web of shell companies and charitable donations that would have been invisible to anyone without Pike's skills. "She orchestrated the entire thing," Vincent said. "The introduction, the affair, the choice of lawyer." "It gets better," Pike said. "Your wife isn't Connor's first mark. Catherine Morrison has done this twice before. Targeted men she blamed for her husband's troubles, used attractive men to seduce their wives, destroy their marriages." Pike showed him photos of 2 other couples. Both divorces went through Henley's firm. Both husbands lost everything. Vincent felt a cold rage building in his chest. Amanda hadn't been seduced. She'd been recruited as a weapon against him. Their marriage had been destroyed as part of an elaborate revenge plot years in the making. Where is Morrison now? That's the problem. She disappeared 3 days ago, closed her bank accounts, sold her house through a quick sale, vanished completely. Pike leaned back in his chair. Professional job, someone with resources and planning. What about Connor? Still at the Riverside apartment, but he's scared. Ordered groceries delivered. Hasn't left the building since your conversation. He's trying to contact Morrison, but her phones are disconnected. Vincent absorbed this information, his mind already working through the implications. Catherine Morrison had spent 2 years destroying his marriage, then disappeared the moment her plan succeeded. She was in the wind, probably beyond his reach, but Connor and Henley were still here, still within his grasp. "I need you to find Morrison," Vincent said, standing to leave. "Whatever it takes, wherever she's gone, I want her found." "What about the others?" Vincent's smile was the one Pike remembered from their shared military past, the smile of a man who decided that half measures weren't enough. "Leave them to me." Vincent's next stop was a warehouse in the industrial district, one of several properties Torres Construction owned for equipment storage. But this particular warehouse served a different purpose. It was where Vincent kept the tools and skills that had nothing to do with building and everything to do with tearing down. Miguel Santos was waiting for him, along with 2 other men Vincent had served with in Afghanistan. They'd all found their way to civilian life through Vincent's company, and they all understood that some debts could only be paid in blood. "Boss." Miguel nodded as Vincent entered. Miguel was Vincent's opposite in many ways. Short where Vincent was tall, quick to anger where Vincent was coldly controlled. But they'd saved each other's lives enough times that words weren't always necessary. "Status report," Vincent said, noting the equipment spread across the workbench. Surveillance gear, burner phones, zip ties, and other items that would never appear on any construction invoice. "Connor's holed up in the apartment like you said, paranoid, jumpy, making phone calls to numbers that don't exist." Tony Rodriguez spoke from where he was monitoring radio equipment. "Henley's been trying to reach him, getting more desperate by the hour." "Good. What about Henley?" "Still going to the office, but his secretary says he's barely functional, drinking during the day, canceling appointments." Miguel grinned without humor. Amazing how a guilty conscience affects a man's work performance. Vincent studied the surveillance photos from Connor's building. The real estate agent looked haggard and unshaven, wearing the same clothes for days. Fear was eating at him from the inside. "Time to increase the pressure," Vincent decided. "Miguel, I want you to make some calls. Anonymous tips to Connor's clients about his financial situation, his habits, his history with married women. Make sure every deal he has in progress falls through." "Copy that." "Tony, reach out to your contacts in narcotics. Make sure they know Connor Fitzgerald is dealing out of the Riverside development. Nothing actionable yet, just enough to put him on their radar." "Consider it done." Vincent turned to the third man, Danny Walsh, a demolition expert who'd found his skills surprisingly transferable to civilian construction. "I need you to pay a visit to Henley's office. Nothing dramatic, just a reminder that some debts come due eventually." "What kind of reminder?" Vincent handed him a manila envelope filled with photos. Henley's family, his wife at the grocery store, his daughter at college, his son at Little League practice. "Make sure he understands that his cooperation 15 years ago put them all in danger." Danny's expression darkened. Like all of them, he had family now. Children who depended on him. The idea of using someone's family as leverage sat poorly with all of them, but they also understood that some enemies left you no choice. "And if he doesn't cooperate?" "Then we move to more direct persuasion." Vincent's phone buzzed with a call from Pike. He answered immediately. "Found something interesting about Catherine Morrison," Pike's voice came through clearly. "She's got a daughter, 26 years old, lives in Boston, works for a nonprofit, goes by Catherine Morrison Jr., but her friends call her Cat." "What's interesting about her?" "She's been in contact with Connor Fitzgerald for the past week. Phone records show a dozen calls between them since your wife moved out. Could be she's cleaning up her mother's mess, or she's continuing her mother's work," Vincent finished. "Send me everything you have on her, already in your email." "But Vincent, this girl's not like her mother. She's got no criminal background, no history of revenge schemes. She might not even know what her mother was doing." Vincent considered this. An innocent daughter trying to clean up her mother's crimes, or a second generation continuing the vendetta? Either way, she was a thread that could lead him to Catherine Morrison. Keep digging. I want to know everything about the daughter, where she works, who she knows, what she cares about. After hanging up, Vincent turned back to his men. Change of plans. We've got a new player in the game. Over the next hour, Vincent outlined the expanded operation. Catherine Morrison had vanished, but her daughter was still accessible. Connor and Henley were vulnerable, but they were also potential sources of information about Morrison's whereabouts. What's the end game here, boss? Miguel asked when Vincent finished. These people destroyed your marriage, but they're civilians. We can't just... Can't just what? Vincent's voice carried the edge that had once terrified enemy combatants. They declared war on me, Miguel. They spent 2 years planning the destruction of my family. You think they deserve mercy because they're civilians? The room fell silent. These men had followed Vincent through hell in Afghanistan because they knew he'd never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself. But they also knew that Vincent's capacity for violence, once unleashed, was difficult to control. We do this clean, Vincent continued, his voice returning to normal. No innocent casualties, no unnecessary damage. But the people responsible for destroying my marriage will pay for what they've done. All of them. As his men dispersed to their assigned tasks, Vincent remained in the warehouse, studying the photos of Catherine Morrison and her daughter. 23 years of marriage destroyed as collateral damage in a revenge plot that had nothing to do with Amanda, and everything to do with decisions made 15 years ago. But Catherine Morrison had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She'd assumed that Vincent Torres was the same man who'd been broken by his court-martial, the same man who'd accepted disgrace and rebuilt his life from nothing. She'd failed to understand that some men don't break, they just get harder. By midnight, Vincent's operation was in motion. Connor would wake up to find his professional life in ruins. Henley would discover that his past sins had consequences that extended far beyond his own life. And Catherine Morrison Jr. would learn that some family legacies come with a price. The war was no longer about a cheating wife and her lover. It was about justice, revenge, and making sure that the people who destroyed his family understood exactly what they'd unleashed. Vincent Torres was done playing defense. It was time to remind the world why Marines were taught that the best defense was overwhelming offense. Catherine Morrison Jr., Kat to her friends, arrived at Logan International Airport on a red-eye flight from Boston. Her usually perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. Vincent watched her from across the terminal, noting the way she constantly checked her phone, the nervous energy that kept her in motion, even while waiting for her rental car. Pike's intelligence had been thorough. Kat Morrison was a social worker specializing in domestic violence cases. The kind of person who genuinely believed in helping others rebuild their lives after trauma. The irony wasn't lost on Vincent. The daughter of the woman who destroyed his marriage made her living helping people escape destructive relationships. She was prettier than her photograph suggested, with her mother's intelligent eyes, but a warmth that Catherine Morrison Sr. had never possessed. As Vincent followed her rental car from the airport, he found himself curious about what she knew of her mother's activities. Kat drove directly to the Riverside development, confirming Vincent's suspicion that she was here to clean up Connor's situation. Vincent parked across the street and watched as she entered the building using a key card, another indication that Catherine Morrison's planning had extended to providing her daughter with access to the operation. 20 minutes later, both Kat and Connor emerged from the building. Connor was carrying a suitcase and looking relieved for the first time in days. They drove to a coffee shop downtown, choosing a corner table where they could watch the street. Vincent positioned himself at the counter, close enough to overhear their conversation, while appearing to read the newspaper. Mom left instructions, Kat was saying, her voice low but clear. You're supposed to disappear for 6 months, maybe longer. There's money in the account she set up, enough to start over somewhere else. Connor's relief was palpable. What about Amanda? What am I supposed to tell her? Nothing. Mom says the marriage is destroyed, which was the point. Your job is done. Vincent felt his jaw clench. Amanda had been collateral damage, a tool to be used and discarded in Catherine Morrison's revenge plot. But I love her, Connor protested. I can't just abandon her. Kat's laugh was bitter. Love her. Connor, you've been following a script my mother wrote. Every romantic gesture, every private moment, every word you've said to that woman, it all came from Mom's playbook. That's not true. What Amanda and I have is real. Is it? Then why did you call Vincent Torres begging for help the moment your finances got tight? Why did you panic when he confronted you? Kat leaned forward, her voice hardening. You're a paid actor in my mother's revenge fantasy. The only thing real about your relationship with Amanda Torres is the damage it's caused. Vincent had heard enough. He folded his newspaper and approached their table, noting how Kat's eyes widened with recognition, while Connor simply looked confused. Mind if I join you? Vincent asked, not waiting for permission before sitting down. Kat recovered quickly, her social worker training helping her maintain composure in unexpected situations. Mr. Torres, I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk. Were you? Vincent studied her face, looking for signs of deception. And what exactly did you want to discuss? An end to this. Kat glanced around the coffee shop, making sure they weren't drawing attention. My mother's vendetta against you has gone too far. It's time to stop. Connor looked between them, finally understanding that he was sitting at a table with two people who knew far more about his situation than he did. Wait, Connor said slowly. You two know each other. Not exactly, Vincent replied. But I know her mother, and I know that you've been Catherine Morrison's puppet for the past 6 months. The color drained from Connor's face. That's not possible. I met Amanda by accident at a charity event. Arranged by my mother, Kat confirmed. She's been planning this for 2 years. Connor, your relationship with Amanda Torres was never real. Vincent watched Connor process this information, saw the exact moment when the reality of his situation truly hit him. The man aged a decade in the span of 30 seconds. Why? Connor whispered. Why would she do this to me? To Amanda. Because 15 years ago my stepfather made a decision that saved Vincent Torres from prison, Kat explained. My mother blamed that decision for everything that went wrong in their marriage, for Dad's drinking, for his eventual death. She wanted Vincent to experience the same kind of loss she did. Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying Kat's expression. And what do you want? I want this to end before anyone else gets hurt. Kat's voice carried genuine emotion. My mother is sick, Mr. Torres. Not physically, but emotionally. She spent 2 years consumed by hatred and revenge, and it's destroyed her ability to think rationally. Where is she? Kat hesitated. I don't know. She liquidated her assets and disappeared 3 days ago, but she left instructions for Connor, money for him to start over, and instructions for me to clean up any loose ends. Kat's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse, pulling out a sealed envelope, including this. Vincent took the envelope, noting his name written on it in elegant handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery with a brief message. Vincent Torres. By now you've realized that your marriage was destroyed as payment for a debt 15 years overdue. Harrison Morrison died because he chose to protect you from the consequences of your actions. Consider your wife's betrayal justice finally served. We're even now. Catherine Morrison. Vincent read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. She thinks we're even, doesn't she? Kat asked quietly. She's lost her husband, her home, her entire life seeking revenge. You've lost your marriage. Maybe it's time for both sides to walk away. Vincent's laugh was cold and humorless. Your mother destroyed 23 years of marriage, turned my wife into a weapon against me, and manipulated an innocent man into betraying everything he claimed to believe in. And you think we're even? What more do you want? Kat's composure was beginning to crack. She's gone. Connor will disappear. The lawyer who helped her will face whatever consequences you decide. What more is there? Vincent stood, looking down at both of them. Justice, Miss Morrison. Your mother started a war thinking she could control the casualties, dictate the terms, and walk away when she was satisfied. But wars don't end when one side decides they've had enough. They end when the victor decides they're over. What does that mean? It means your mother made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed I was the same broken man who lost his military career 15 years ago. She didn't realize that some experiences don't break you. They forge you into something harder. Vincent turned to Connor, who was staring at the table as if it might provide answers. You have a choice to make. You can run like Catherine Morrison wants you to, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or you can help me find her and make this right. How can I help you? I don't even know where she is. But you know how she thinks, how she operates. You've been taking her money, following her instructions, playing her game for months. Vincent's voice carried the authority of command. You help me find her, and when this is over, you walk away clean. You run now, and I'll hunt you down as an accomplice to the destruction of my marriage. Kat stood as well, her social worker instincts kicking in. Mr. Torres, threatening Connor won't— I'm not threatening him, Vincent interrupted. I'm offering him a chance to redeem himself, the same chance your stepfather offered me 15 years ago. The parallel hit Kat like a physical blow. Judge Morrison had given Vincent Torres a second chance. And now Vincent was offering Connor the same opportunity. What do you need me to do? Connor asked quietly. Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Help me finish what your benefactor started. The plan was elegantly simple, the kind of psychological trap that Catherine Morrison herself might have admired. Connor would contact her using an emergency protocol she'd established, claiming that Vincent Torres had discovered the truth and was systematically destroying everyone involved in the plot. The beauty of the plan was that it wasn't entirely a lie. Over the past week, Vincent's operation had methodically dismantled the lives of everyone connected to Catherine Morrison's revenge scheme. Robert Henley's law practice was in ruins, his past corruption exposed through anonymous tips to the State Bar Association. Connor's real estate license was under investigation. His professional reputation had been destroyed by carefully placed rumors about his financial improprieties and habits. But Vincent had been careful to leave trails that led nowhere. Breadcrumbs suggested his reach was longer and more ruthless than it actually was. He wanted Catherine Morrison to believe she was dealing with a man who would stop at nothing to destroy his enemies. The call came on a Thursday evening. Connor, following Vincent's script, placed the emergency contact using a burner phone from a location Pike had confirmed was untraceable. Catherine, thank goodness. Connor's voice carried genuine fear, not difficult to achieve given his circumstances. He knows Torres knows everything. Catherine Morrison's voice came through the speaker with crystalline clarity. Vincent and his team listened from a surveillance van parked nearby. Calm down. What exactly does he know about you, about the money, about Judge Morrison? He had photographs, bank records, everything, Connor replied, following the script perfectly, his voice rising with each word. He said he's going to destroy everyone involved in what he calls the conspiracy against him. That's impossible. I covered our tracks. He had help. Professional help, military people. Catherine, this isn't some construction worker seeking revenge. This is a trained fighter with resources and connections. Vincent allowed himself a small smile. Connor was selling the story with the conviction of someone who genuinely believed it. Where are you now? Catherine's voice had taken on the sharp edge of someone whose carefully laid plans were unraveling. A motel outside the city. But I can't stay here. Torres found Henley. Found his family. The lawyer's in protective custody, but his wife and kids. Connor let his voice trail off suggestively. There was silence on the line for nearly 30 seconds. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more determined. There's a house upstate, a place Harrison used for fishing before he died. I've been staying there since I left the city. She rattled off an address that Pike immediately began tracing. Come there tonight. We'll figure out how to deal with Torres permanently. Permanently. He's not going to stop, Connor. Men like him don't forgive, don't forget, don't negotiate. The only way this ends is if he can't continue his vendetta. The line went dead, leaving the van in silence. Vincent looked around at his team. Miguel, Tony, Danny, and Pike, all of whom had heard Catherine Morrison discuss dealing with him as if planning a dinner party. "Well," Miguel said finally, "I guess we know what kind of person we're dealing with." Vincent checked his watch. 9:30 p.m. The drive to the address Catherine had given was approximately 3 hours through mountain roads that would be treacherous in the dark. "Pike, what do we know about this fishing lodge?" The investigator was already pulling up satellite images on his laptop. Remote location, single-access road, cabin-style construction, built in the 70s, owned by Judge Morrison since 1985. If someone wanted to disappear, it's perfect. No close neighbors, no cell tower coverage, completely off the grid. Security unknown, but probably minimal. Morrison's been there less than a week, and she wasn't planning for company. Vincent studied the satellite images, noting the layout of the property, the surrounding terrain, potential escape routes. His military training automatically cataloged defensive positions and approach vectors. Connor goes in first, Vincent decided. Normal arrival, nothing suspicious. Once he's inside and we confirm Catherine's location, we move. "What's the objective?" Tony asked. "Capture or kill." Vincent considered the question. Catherine Morrison had destroyed his marriage, manipulated his wife into betrayal, and had just discussed murdering him as if it were a business decision. Under the laws of war, she would be considered an enemy combatant deserving no quarter, but they weren't at war, despite what it felt like. "We bring her back alive," Vincent said finally. "She's going to face justice for what she's done. Real justice, not the vigilante kind." Danny looked skeptical. "And if she doesn't want to come back alive?" Vincent's expression hardened. "Then we accommodate her preference." The drive through the mountains was conducted in tactical silence, 3 vehicles maintaining careful spacing on the winding roads. Connor rode with Vincent, his nervousness genuine now that he understood the stakes involved. "What happens to me after this?" Connor asked as they navigated a particularly treacherous curve. "That depends on what happens tonight," Vincent replied. "Catherine Morrison orchestrated the destruction of my marriage, but you were the weapon she used. The question is whether you were an unwilling tool or a willing accomplice." "I thought I loved Amanda. I thought she loved me." "Did you? Or did you love the lifestyle she represented, the security of being with a successful man's wife?" Vincent glanced at Connor in the darkness. "Because from where I sit, you pursued a married woman, moved her into an apartment paid for by another woman's money, and prepared to take half of everything her husband had built. That doesn't sound like love. It sounds like greed." Connor had no answer for that, which was answer enough. They reached the vicinity of Morrison's fishing lodge at 12:30 a.m., parking their vehicles a mile down the mountain and proceeding on foot. The cabin was exactly as Pike's research had indicated. Isolated, defensible, and currently showing lights in 2 windows. Vincent positioned his team around the property, then sent Connor up the access road with instructions to call out if Catherine Morrison wasn't alone or if the situation felt wrong. The last thing Vincent wanted was to walk into an ambush. Connor's approach to the cabin was visible through night vision scopes, his nervousness apparent in the way he hesitated before knocking on the door. The door opened almost immediately, confirming that Catherine had been watching for his arrival. From his position 50 yards away, Vincent could see her clearly for the first time. An elegant woman in her 50s, still beautiful despite the stress of the past week. She embraced Connor with what appeared to be genuine relief, then ushered him inside. Vincent waited 15 minutes, then activated his radio. "All teams move in. Remember, she's wanted alive." As Vincent approached the cabin, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. A phone call from his wife's lover, a lawyer who tried to destroy him 15 years ago. A conspiracy of revenge that had cost him his marriage and nearly his sanity. But Catherine Morrison had made one fatal error in her planning. She'd assumed that destroying Vincent's marriage would break him the way losing her husband had broken her. Instead, it had simply reminded him who he really was underneath the civilian contractor's facade. And tonight, Catherine Morrison was going to learn the difference between seeking revenge and facing it. The cabin's interior was a study in masculine nostalgia. Mounted fish on knotty pine walls, worn leather furniture, and the kind of stone fireplace that belonged in a different era. Catherine Morrison sat across from Connor at a rough wooden table, a bottle of expensive whiskey between them, and what appeared to be planning documents spread across the surface. Vincent's entry was silent, a skill perfected during night raids in Afghanistan. Neither Catherine nor Connor noticed his presence until he spoke. "Good evening, Catherine." Catherine Morrison spun in her chair, her face cycling through surprise, fear, and finally resigned acceptance in the space of 3 seconds. Connor started to rise, but Vincent's slight gesture kept him seated. "Vincent Torres," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I wondered when you'd find me." "Did you?" Vincent stepped into the circle of lamplight, noting the papers on the table, bank accounts, forged documents, what appeared to be a new identity, complete with passport. "Looks like you were planning to disappear again." "Can you blame me?" Catherine poured herself a glass of whiskey with steady hands. "You've systematically destroyed everyone connected to our operation. Henley's practice is ruined, Connor's career is over, and I assume I'm next on your list." Vincent pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, close enough to see the intelligence in her eyes, the careful control she maintained even in defeat. "You assume correctly. Then why the games? Why not just end me and be done with it?" The question hung in the air, loaded with the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment. Vincent studied Catherine's face, looking for some sign of regret, some indication that she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. He found nothing but cold calculation. "Because I want to understand," Vincent said finally. "I want to understand how a federal judge's wife becomes so consumed with revenge that she destroys innocent people's lives as collateral damage." Catherine's laugh was bitter.
"Innocent? You call yourself innocent?"
"I call my wife innocent. I call the 23 years of marriage you destroyed innocent. I call the children whose family you shattered innocent." Vincent's voice remained calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You want to blame me for your husband's death? Fine, but Amanda Torres never did anything to you. Amanda Torres was married to you. That made her fair game." The casual cruelty of the statement hit Vincent like a physical blow. Catherine Morrison had destroyed his marriage, not because Amanda deserved punishment, but simply because she could. "You spent 2 years planning this," Vincent continued. 2 years researching my life, my business, my family. You recruited Connor, bought off Henley, orchestrated every detail of my wife's seduction. All for what? To prove a point? To balance the scales? Catherine's composure finally cracked, revealing the obsession underneath.
"Harrison died because he saved you from prison 15 years ago. Do you know what that decision cost us? The threats, the paranoia, the drinking? You destroyed my husband's life and he protected you anyway."
Your husband made a legal decision based on evidence and procedure. If he received threats, that's on the people who made them, not on me. Easy words from someone who walked away free while my husband paid the price for his conscience. Catherine stood, moving to the fireplace where embers still glowed from an earlier fire. "I watched Harrison destroy himself, protecting a man who didn't deserve protection. I watched him drink himself into the grave because he couldn't live with the consequences of his decision." Vincent felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, quickly suppressed. "So, you decided to destroy my marriage to make yourself feel better about your husband's choices. I decided to make you pay for what you cost us." Catherine turned back to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I wanted you to lose something irreplaceable, something that defined who you were. I wanted you to understand what it felt like to watch your life crumble because of decisions made by other people." "And Amanda, what about what you cost her?" For the first time, Catherine's mask slipped completely. "Amanda Torres chose to have an affair. I simply provided the opportunity." Vincent stood slowly, his movement causing Connor to press back in his chair. "You manipulated her. You used Connor to seduce her, systematically, professionally. You turned her into a weapon against me. I showed her an alternative to her boring suburban life. If she was strong enough to resist, she would have stayed with you. She wasn't strong enough to resist a professional con man backed by unlimited resources and a 2-year plan. Vincent's voice carried the finality of a judge's sentence. But you knew that when you picked her. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of dying embers in the fireplace. Finally, Catherine returned to her chair and poured another glass of whiskey. "So, what now?" she asked. "You found me. You've heard my confession. What's your next move?" Vincent pulled out his phone and activated a recording app, setting it on the table between them. "You're going to tell me exactly how you orchestrated my wife's seduction, how you bought off Robert Henley, how you recruited Connor. Every detail, every payment, every lie. And if I refuse, then my associates outside will convince you otherwise." Vincent's voice carried no emotion. They're very good at persuasion. Catherine glanced toward the windows, perhaps realizing for the first time that she was surrounded. "And after I confess, what happens then?" "Then you're going to disappear, permanently." Vincent leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Not to some tropical paradise with your stolen money and new identity. You're going to prison for conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other charges that will keep you locked up until you're too old to hurt anyone else." "Prison?" Catherine seemed genuinely surprised. "Vincent, I'm 53 years old. A conviction would be a life sentence." "Yes, it would." The reality of her situation finally hit Catherine Morrison. She'd spent 2 years planning Vincent's destruction, confident that she could deliver her revenge and escape the consequences. She'd never considered that her victim might have the resources and determination to hunt her down. "I won't do it," she said finally. "I won't confess to anything." Vincent stood again, this time walking to the window where Miguel and Tony were visible in the darkness. He tapped on the glass twice, then returned to the table. "Connor," Vincent said without taking his eyes off Catherine, "why don't you step outside for a few minutes? Get some fresh air." Connor didn't need to be told twice. He was out the door before Catherine could object. When they were alone, Vincent pulled his chair closer to Catherine's, close enough that she could see the scars on his hands, the carefully controlled violence in his posture. "Let me tell you a story," Vincent said conversationally. 15 years ago, I was interrogating an enemy combatant who had information about a planned attack on American soldiers. He wouldn't talk, so I used enhanced techniques to persuade him. I went too far, crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed, and nearly killed him in the process. Catherine listened with growing unease. The military court-martial was a formality. I was guilty and everyone knew it. But your husband found a technicality that got the charges thrown out. I walked away free, but I never forgot what I was capable of when pushed beyond my limits. Vincent's voice never changed tone, never rose above a conversational level, but Catherine found herself unable to look away from his eyes. "You destroyed my marriage as revenge for something that happened 15 years ago. You turned my wife into a manipulated and innocent man into betraying everything he believed in, and corrupted a legal system that was supposed to provide justice. Trusted." Vincent smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "Do you really think prison is the worst thing that could happen to you?" The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Catherine Morrison was alone in an isolated cabin with a man who'd been trained to extract information through whatever means necessary. "What do you want me to say?" she whispered. "The truth, all of it." Over the next hour, Catherine Morrison provided a complete confession detailing her 2-year plan with the clinical precision of someone who'd thought through every angle. Vincent recorded it all, occasionally asking for clarification or additional detail. When she finished, Vincent turned off the recording and sat back in his chair. Was it worth it? Catherine considered the question seriously. "Ask me again in 20 years when I'm sitting in a prison cell." "You won't be in prison," Vincent said quietly. Catherine looked up sharply. "What?" "Prison requires a trial, evidence, due process, all things that take time and money and provide opportunities for clever lawyers to find technicalities." Vincent stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. You destroyed my marriage because you thought I got away with something I shouldn't have. Maybe it's time to prove you were right. The implication hit Catherine like a physical blow. You're going to kill me. I'm going to give you the same choice you gave my wife. Vincent turned back to face her. You can confess your crimes publicly, expose everyone who helped you and spend the rest of your life in prison, or you can take the easy way out. Vincent pulled a small vial from his pocket and set it on the table. Concentrated insulin, enough to trigger fatal hypoglycemic shock in about 30 minutes. It looks like a heart attack to anyone who doesn't know what to look for. Catherine stared at the vial with horrified fascination. You're giving me the choice to commit suicide. I'm giving you the choice to die with dignity rather than spend 20 years being someone's entertainment in federal prison. The same choice you should have given my wife instead of turning her into a weapon against me. This is murder. This is justice, the kind your husband would have understood. Vincent moved toward the door. You have 10 minutes to decide. Choose prison and I'll call the FBI myself. Choose the vial and your daughter will find a suicide note explaining that guilt over your actions became too much to bear. You bastard. Yes, Vincent agreed, I am. You made me one when you destroyed my family for the crime of surviving something I never should have survived. Vincent opened the door and stepped into the cool mountain air where Connor sat on the porch steps looking shell-shocked. Is it over? Connor asked. Almost, Vincent replied, checking his watch. One way or another, it'll be over in 10 minutes. They waited in silence, watching the cabin windows. At exactly 9 minutes, the lights went out inside. Vincent waited another 60 seconds, then returned to the cabin. Catherine Morrison sat slumped in her chair, the empty vial beside her hand. On the table was a handwritten note confessing to the systematic destruction of Vincent Torres's marriage and accepting full responsibility for her actions. Vincent checked for a pulse, found none, then called his team on the radio. It's finished. Clean up and move out. As his men processed the scene, Vincent walked outside and called Pike. Any word on the daughter? Still in Boston, unaware of what's happened. Her mother's confession should be enough to clear her of any involvement. Good. Leave her alone. She's paid enough for her mother's crimes. Vincent hung up and looked at Connor, who was staring at the cabin with a mixture of horror and relief. What happens to me now? Connor asked. Vincent considered the question. Connor had been a tool in Catherine Morrison's revenge plot, but he'd also chosen to betray a marriage, to pursue a woman he knew was vulnerable, and to participate in the destruction of a family. You disappear, Vincent said finally. New city, new name, new life. And if I ever see you again, if you ever contact my wife or children, if you ever try to profit from what happened here, I'll finish what Catherine Morrison started. Connor nodded, understanding that he was being given a mercy he probably didn't deserve. As Vincent drove down the mountain road an hour later, he reflected on the price of revenge. Catherine Morrison had gotten her justice. Vincent Torres had indeed become the killer she'd always believed him to be. But in doing so, she'd also ensured that her own daughter would grow up without a mother, just as she'd tried to ensure that Vincent's children would grow up in a broken home. The circle was complete, but Vincent felt no satisfaction in its closing. He'd won, but victory tasted like ashes and regret. His phone buzzed with a text message from Amanda. Connor's gone. He left a note saying he was sorry that everything between us was a lie. I don't understand what's happening. Vincent deleted the message without responding. Amanda had made her choice, and consequences couldn't be undone by apologies or explanations. She would have to live with the wreckage of their marriage, just as he would have to live with the knowledge of what he'd done to preserve his honor. Justice had been served cold and final as a winter grave. But Vincent Torres had learned something Catherine Morrison never understood. Some victories cost more than defeats, and some justice was too expensive for anyone to afford. The war was over. Everyone had lost.